Flushing girl from Flushing, the nanny named Fran.
Oh, Mr. Sheffield.
Miss Fine.
Hello. Welcome back to another episode of Oh, Mr. Sheffield. It's a podcast about The Nanny. That's a hit sitcom from the 90s starring Fran Drescher. I am Sean DiPasquale here with...
Toria Sheffield.
That's right. And this week we are watching Season 5, Episode 16, The Dinner Party. Toria, what happens in this episode?
This is the episode where it's post Fran and Mr. Sheffield's engagement, and they get invited to a fancy dinner party, debuting like themselves as a couple. And Fran starts to feel incredibly insecure about being a part of this new high society world.
And with good reason, I think, because, and we'll get into it, but like, they're kind of shitty to her. This one was written by Ivan Menchel, what a mensch, and directed by Dorothy Lyman. So, yeah, overall, I like this one, and I'm excited to talk about it. There was some fun stuff in here.
I liked it a lot. It felt very real. And it moved the plot forward, but also felt like something that would actually happen to this couple.
I liked Maxwell having to build Fran up for a change, because it feels like so many times it's like Fran kind of coming to his rescue. And so it was sort of nice to see him be like, hey, you know what? Like, you're great. And like, I don't care what these dumb people think, you know? And that was really nice. I mean, spoilers for the end of the episode, but whatever. You've all seen it.
And so the episode begins with Fran coming downstairs into the kitchen in a bathrobe. It's morning, and she's still like over the moon about the engagement, because where we left them off last week, Mr. Sheffield had just gotten mugged, but then proposed to Fran with that little like, you know, cap ring, like a soda cap ring. And she's actually still wearing the ring. And, you know, Niall says something like, you know, you're going to replace the ring. And she's like, oh, I don't know. We're kind of like happy with this for right now. And he even says, would you like your breakfast, Mrs. Sheffield? And it's this really cute moment, because she's like, oh my God, you know, Mrs. Sheffield. There's a knock on the door, and it's Sylvia, of course, which means she must be arriving at their mansion at like 7:40 on a
like 8 a.m. she shows up.
And she also asks about the ring, and she's like, it's not a real engagement until I can take my daughter's hand, stick it, I can take my daughter's hand and say, stick these carrots in your soup, Mrs. Glickman. So she's clearly like, my main priority in this situation is getting to brag about my daughter's engagement ring
to a rich guy.
Well,
it's that, right? It's the ring, but it's more Sylvia wants to be able to brag, like, my daughter is marrying like a very, very rich man, and that means she's successful, because that's how Sylvia sees the world, basically. You know, like, and it in her mind, I'm sure it also moves, you know, I mean, and it does, right? It moves Fran beyond the station of nanny. Although that is something that I wanted to talk to you about, because we're in a weird dichotomy right now where it's like she's still technically the help, I think. Right? It's unclear.
Next week's episode, we actually get into it, because I watched ahead. So there will be an answer. Cool. And then Mr. Sheffield comes in, and he reassures Sylvia that he has reserved the whole morning to take Fran ring shopping. So she can rest assured that's going to happen. And I had this little note where I was like, I'm not going to lie, I started to get a little jealous of Fran for the first time in my life after watching the show for 5 seasons. And I wrote, it's not for the ring, but it's just for suddenly like how easy life's going to become for her. Like I was just, you know, because we as the viewer are going to start seeing her transition from the help to very wealthy person. And I was just like, oh man, how sweet would that be?
Although, you know, I would argue, since she's gotten this job, life's been pretty fucking easy for her. You know, it's like...
No, I would say this. It's not that life...
She causes all her own problems.
Oh, no. You're right. It's not that like day-to-day life is hard, but there is something where it's like, oh yeah, but he could fire me. They could move. The kids are going to grow up soon. And like, so in her mind, this is sweet, but it's temporary until...
True. And now, no matter what happens, she'll get half.
Yes. No, but yeah, I think there is a huge psychological difference between working for a wealthy family and getting the perks and actually being wealthy. Because like, I've known nannies in LA who like, you know, were taking the kids to like Air One, and they also got to like eat those like, $40 potato chips, but it was still completely different than being part of that family,
I bet you $40 potato chips taste better than regular potato chips.
Oh, I bet you though they probably have like nutritional yeast on them and stuff. For those listeners who don't live in LA, Era One is like the most expensive. It is like Whole Foods on crack. It is so expensive. Yeah. The stuff is so healthy and organic, and people like go there to be seen, basically. Like
it's Whole Foods for people who look down on people that shop at Whole Foods.
Yes. It's next level. It's aspirational AF. But anyway,
this is another very California reference, but it's basically the Gelsons of Whole Foods.
Yes.
which no one will get. All right,
I know. Okay, but so
she has a great. Should we? I never know if I should like talk about great lines or just save them all, but then it feels like I don't say anything. There's a great line when Sylvia walks in where she goes, "She's turning into a shiksa right before my eyes." She's like so upset.
Yes, because Fran says she doesn't really care when they replace the ring, and she kind of likes the one she has. And she's like, and all I care about is that we're together. And she goes, oh, she's turning into a shiksa. And then Sylvia and Fran mentioned to Mr. Sheffield that if they're going to go ring shopping that day, they've got to stop by Uncle Stanley's jewelry store. They're like, oh, he has a great little shop. And Mr. Sheffield's like, I'd really rather go to visit my jeweler at Cartier. And they both go, retail. like the idea of like not going to like a small business where you can like get some big deal from whoever is like just disgusting to them. Yeah. And they're like, well, Uncle Stanley will be very offended if we don't at least stop by. So he agrees to go, like, just out of politeness. And then there is this scene where then Mr. Sheffield goes, oh, before we go, I need to call Cece. I've been so busy, I haven't even told her about the engagement. And Niles goes, oh, it's all right, sir. I've taken care of it. We then cut to Cece in her apartment. There's a knock on the door. She answers it. There's 2 singing telegram guys. They're dancing and going, Fran and Maxwell are engaged. It looks like you're a loser. She'll be happy all her days and you'll become a boozer. And then they literally like tap out. Like, what is it? We're like double tap.
They like double tap out. They're like,
and Cece's eye starts to twitch, which is definitely setting her up for a nervous breakdown.
Yes. Yeah, it was really good, and there was a lot of great Cece Niles playing. Like, I think it's coming up, but like he goes, Miss Babcock's coming, and then the doorbell rings, and he goes, and he runs to the door, and he goes, is that Miss Babcock? It is, like a little kid.
Yes, only because he wants to torture her with more good news about Fran and Maxwell.
It's so good.
Then we cut to Fran and Mr. Sheffield at Uncle Sammy's shop. And Uncle Sammy is played by Fran Drescher's real-life father, Morty Drescher. No. and he is so good. I'm like, how is this man like not a professional actor? Like the fact that this is probably like his first time acting means that like you can tell like whatever she has, it's very natural and genetic. He is so gaudy. He's wearing a gaudy suit, gaudy rings, and he keeps like reminding them that they can also get their keys copied at the store. And there's a big sign in the store that says all class, no glass. So like, oh, like all the jewels are real. And then he's like,
but then when they question him about like how many carats is this, he's like, yeah,
I don't like to label.
Yeah.
Well, and then he takes Mr. Sheffield aside and he's like, this girl's like a daughter to me. You could have anything in the store at cost plus 20% to cover expenses. You understand. So Mr. Sheffield sort of humors Fran and Uncle Sammy, and then is like, I'm not sure if there's anything, that's quite what we're looking for. And so they end up going to Cartier, and there's some B-roll of the two of them walking in, and Mr. Sheffield picks out a giant ring. And this is where I got then another pang of jealousy for the first time in my life for Fran, just because, again, I was like, oh my God, just the idea of like suddenly never having to work again, like overnight. I was just like, oh my God, I'm so tired. And then there was this really funny line though where the like jeweler goes, "Oh, and we carry an exquisite collection of De Beers," which is like a very expensive diamond brand.
Oh yeah.
And Fran goes, "Oh, a beer sounds great. I'm parched." So we're also setting up in this episode like a very like high class, low class dichotomy, which I think would be really, very realistic. Like the reality of their union kind of like coming into focus, like what that's really going to mean, day to day when she's not the help. And so I was like, I'm so glad they explored this in an episode.
Well, it's also from basically this scene on, you start to get a real sense of like real Pretty Woman vibes. And then the show very smartly calls that out later because it's like, yeah, that's kind of what this is. She's going to walk into these stores. They're going to, size her up based on just looks and treat her like garbage. And then they're going to find out she's, engaged to a very, very rich man. And then they're going to suddenly be super, super nice to her. And that's what happens. And it's great. It's satisfying in Pretty Woman and it's satisfying here. Nothing better.
Remember Pretty Woman? Big mistake. Huge. We then go back to Fran and she's at the mansion showing Niles and the kids her ring. And this is when the doorbell rings in that part you were talking about where he's like, "Oh, maybe it's Miss Babcock. It is Miss Babcock. It is." And, she comes into the house and he shows her Fran's ring and her eye starts to twitch again. And then,
but she does a really good job of no selling it. Like he's like, "Look at the ring," and like you see the twitch, but then she's just like, "Oh yeah,
yes,
okay,
it's beautiful."
Yeah.
And then Mr. Sheffield comes in and he's like, "Oh, look, like our engagement's been featured in Liz Smith's column." Liz Smith being a very famous gossip columnist and sort of society columnist as well. And I felt so bad for Fran in this moment because she's really excited at first.
Columnist being someone who wrote for a newspaper being a thing that people used to read. Yes. I feel like we have to really define, like it was kind of like TMZ, I guess, or
yes, it was a paper that got physically delivered to your home, and that is how you got information. Oh my God, it sounds like insane now.
It does sound insane. Like, so you didn't know anything that was going on until they brought a paper to your house, and then you had to read that whole paper to know anything going on in the world.
And everyone's parents would sit with the morning paper. And the thing is, the weekday papers were mostly just news. The weekend papers were extra special and thick because they didn't just have the news. They had a sports section. They had an entertainment section. They had the comics.
In color.
In color. Yeah. So it was like you got all this extra stuff to know.
What a treat.
Oh my God.
And I don't know about you, but my mother had a habit of, we would get this whole ass newspaper, a million different things you could read and learn and educate yourself on. My mom would go right to the local section, immediately find the most horrific story about murder or kidnapping, and then read it to us in like a state of despair. Like, oh my God, people are dying. Like, don't go outside. Don't leave the house.
Yeah, bypassing the financial news, the international news, the politics.
I didn't learn anything about the world as a child except that like people got murdered and stolen all the time.
Well, so Fran, she opens the newspaper excitedly and she's like, "Oh, look," she's like, "it says Maxwell Sheffield, Tony Award-winning Broadway producer." And she kind of looks at him proudly and she goes, "is marrying the help." And then they not even said that about her. They didn't like say where she was from, what her parents' names were, or what she does. They then
Fran Phone.
Yeah, they misspelled her name as Fran Phone. And I did feel bad for her because she was so excited. She was like not begrudging Mr. Sheffield like his wonderful, adjectives. She was proud. And then there's nothing about her. And I guess to be fair, like what would you say about her? Like, she's not a known person in the world like he is, but she was definitely
there is maybe a more delicate way. Like, I hear you. Like, I agree. Yes. It's very, like, what would you label this random human being as other than a person, right? But I feel like there's a more delicate way than just saying, like, he's marrying the help. It's, like, so dismissive,
you could say, like, marrying Fran Fine of, like, Queens, New York.
That's all you gotta say.
So-and-so and so-and-so. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it.
And, well, but then this was so cute. Niles very much playing that guy from Pretty Woman. Remember, like the hotel concierge who like kind of takes Julia Roberts under his wing. He tries, oh no, actually this comes later. But in this moment, Niles tries to cheer her up he's like waving an invitation and he's like, oh no, but look, Miss Fine, you and Mr. Sheffield have officially been invited to this incredibly exclusive dinner party and it's addressed to both of you. And, she's like, oh, Niles, I'm nervous about this. And he's like, oh, you don't need to be nervous. We then cut to an extremely exclusive and snotty boutique on like Fifth Avenue or something. And Fran, Sylvia, and Val, they walk in and it's like this very sterile environment. They don't even have any actual clothes on the shelves or anything because I guess that would be too gauche. And this snooty saleswoman literally like looks them up and down and she assumes that they must be there to use the bathroom. And sort of what you were saying, then when she actually finds out that they're when she finds out they're there to shop, she goes, oh, you'll probably have better luck down the street at Flash and Trash. And Sylvia had the best line. I loved how Sylvia owned this woman. She goes, darling, it's obvious you're cranky because you haven't had lunch. And then she goes, ever. so not only being like you're being a jerk, but like you're way too skinny. And then she goes, but my daughter is the future Mrs. Maxwell Sheffield. And then Frank goes,
the future Maxwell Sheffield, Broadway producer.
Yes. And the woman's eyes like light up because she realizes like, oh, I made a mistake. And then Fran goes, yes. And this is my ma. And this is my friend, Valerie Torriello of the Flushing Meadows Torriellos. And Val like almost serenely goes, north of the tire recycling center.
Amazing delivery.
Good. And it was so good. Yeah. I was so proud. And, Sylvia gets let off by the sales girl, to like go look at something. And Fran confides in Val that she confides that she's super nervous about this dinner party. And she really wants to make a good impression. And I guess, again, felt so bad for her because I was like, oh yeah, this kind of is like the reality of all this crashing down on you. It was something you dreamed about for so long, but yeah, the reality is you're probably going to have a very long life of, people looking down on you, and always sort of whispering about how, he just married his nanny. And that is very sucky.
And it's funny. I mean, I guess that's the nature of a show like this, to dig maybe a little too deep, but it feels like, up until now, like Fran's never really shied away from a fancy party and is usually, extremely outgoing. And if anything, a little, I don't know, naive is the right word, but for lack of a better word, naive about how little she fits in, there's like that she exudes a confidence normally. So I thought it was really interesting that like that shifts when the pressure is put on her to like be something new, like she's gone into these situations previously as just like, whatever, I can kind of like do whatever I want, almost invisible, I guess. And now it's like eyes are going to be on her and she like panics under the pressure, which I thought was like a cool way to play it,
Yeah. I mean, I guess I do have a note at the end of this where I was like, oh, but you know what? Well, we'll get into it. But like, I kind of wanted this episode to resolve with her going in, being her most loud and authentic self and not giving like a shit about what other people think. And that kind of being, and this ends up getting resolved in a very different way. And I was like, I think I might have loved the messaging a little, the messaging of like, she's still fabulous. She's still the girl wearing red when everyone else is in tan and like, screw you guys. But something else happens. It's also a good resolution, but we'll get into it. But also I said, so so then they're in this like, absurdly upscale boutique. And I just went, do you remember that line in Romy and Michelle's high school reunion when they're watching Pretty Woman? And in the scene when Julia Roberts gets sort of like laughed out of a very fancy store, they go, like those sales girls in Beverly Hills aren't bigger whores than she is. And I just was like, that is such a good line.
That's a great line. I gotta rewatch that. I think I only saw that movie one time. I have to rewatch that movie.
It is one of my favorite movies of all time. It is so perfectly weird. But then we then get to a quick scene back at the mansion where Cece is sitting in the living room and she sits Gracie down and she's like, little girl, like, you're very, very upset about this marriage between your father and Nanny. Fine, aren't you? Because she's trying to poke holes in this any way she can. And Gracie's sort of like, she's like, Miss Babcock, no, like, I'm very happy. I love Fran. My father loves Fran too. You really need to move on. And, and we sort of see that Cece is like just really struggling. She sort of almost is like, I have nothing and nobody. And runs that out. And then the next scene, Fran comes down the stairs in a gorgeous black gown and she's ready to go out to this very fancy dinner party. And this is, again, she sort of says to Niles, like, Niles, I'm really nervous. And he takes her hands. And this is where he's sort of like the concierge in Pretty Woman. I kind of jumped the gun before, but he's like, you're going to do great. He's like, you have style, you have flair. That's how you became the nanny. And I was like, yay.
Same.
Well, and then we cut to the dinner party. And at first, Fran is very comfortable. Like, she's not self-conscious at all. She's talking, and she's talking to the host, who is played by Diane Wilk. I don't know if you noticed that.
Ooh, I did not. That's cool.
And she's, she's just being herself, and everybody else, these other women are making these very snide little comments behind her back.
They're being cruel. Like, I was like, man, that is like, they're not just like, it would have been one thing if they just sort of ignored her, but like they're saying like mean stuff to her, like insulting things or about her.
Yes.
And I thought that was like almost like a little too far, like, I don't know that these women would have gone that far in this scenario. I feel like they would have just cold shouldered her and then maybe talk shit about her later.
Yeah. Well, what they do is they kind of smile vacantly and then whisper to each other mean things, like a little too loudly. And then, and Fran, meanwhile, she is kind of sticking out like a sore thumb. She's like, condensing platters, and she's telling weird stories about her relatives. And she's like, oh, you got so much extra salmon. I'm just going to condense. It's like, like not knowing the little like social norms of this situation. And then she ends up slipping back into the kitchen, like holding these platters that she's going to condense. And she ends up overhearing the maids talking about her. And it's super sad because they're not saying anything mean, but what she overhears is like one maid saying like, oh, like, do you hear all that, the horrible things they're saying about Maxwell Sheffield's fiance behind her back? Like, I feel so sorry for her. Like, they're all just laughing. And she hears this and her face just falls because she thought everything was going fine, that everybody liked her. And this would be so upsetting.
Yeah. Solid acting moment from Fran here too. Like she sells that hurt really, really well. Sometimes on sitcoms, I feel like people overplay stuff like this, and she just like, her face just kind of like falls a little bit. Like you just like see the wind get sucked out of her and like, she just looks very, very, very like betrayed. And I thought she did a really good job there.
Hey, it's Kaylee Cuoco for Priceline. Ready to go to your happy place for a happy price? Well, why didn't you say so? Just download the Priceline app right now and save up to 60% on hotels. So whether it's Cousin Kevin's Kazoo Concert in Kansas City, go Kevin, or Becky's Bachelorette Bash in Bermuda, you never have to miss a trip ever again. So download the Priceline app today. Your savings are waiting.
Go to your happy place for a happy price. Go to your happy price, Priceline.
Did you notice that the show also definitely like took a beat to kind of show what the help was up to during this fancy party? Like, they didn't really need to spend time like kind of humanizing these two women and, giving them a little funny beat and showing that like they are these three-dimensional people who are, who behind the scenes have a lot going on. But they did, which I thought was also a really nice nod to just like the people that have to work these parties.
Well, and I think it also, what it was trying to do, Fran is not of this world, right? So like, even though like, I don't think Fran was acting out of turn for like a normal party, right? That's actually a nice thing she was doing. Like, if you had a party at your house and one of your guests was like, oh, you know what? I'm just going to like help out and grab a couple of these things and like condense. So like, it's less the host has to do later. Like, that's genuinely like a nice gesture. you know?
Mhm.
What Fran is like lacking though is, and it's good that she's lacking this, but like Fran is lacking the like callousness of high society, of like, oh, doing anything like that is so beneath me that like I wouldn't even consider doing it, because that's what we have the help for. And so I think that's why like that scene where we see the the maids in the kitchen kind of leads in by being like, yeah, but like they're actually more like Fran than any of these women are. Like, and Fran is just a like a normal person and probably better off for it too,
For sure, for sure. And then then we cut to the next day, and Fran's in the kitchen at the mansion with her mom, and she's so upset about what happened the night before. And she really actually starts to doubt herself, like in a way we've never really seen, where she's always been like laser focused on becoming engaged to Mr. Sheffield. And now she's like, maybe I'm really not good enough. Maybe I'm not good enough for this world. Maybe this really won't work. And Sylvia, while also being extremely focused on food, is then says, she's like, remember when we went to the Doral Hotel in Miami Beach and I went to the pool bar in a string bikini? And she's like, and do you know why people were laughing behind my back? And Fran's like, because that was the funniest view. And Sylvia goes, she goes, because they were jealous. I dared to be different, and you're different. You're unique. And I thought that was really beautiful advice, even again, between her constantly trying to ask about food. But the thing is, this doesn't really cheer Fran up, because she says something that I also thought was a very realistic thing that someone could feel. She goes, Ma, sometimes you don't want to be different. Sometimes you just want to fit in. And whether that is good or healthy, it's how people feel sometimes. Sometimes people
it's realistic.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Even though it might not be like the right, in heavy quotes, right way to feel, it's like, yeah, sometimes people do just want, like, they just want to blend and like feel like they're part of something. And not everybody wants to be the person who's different and proud of being different, So yeah, I thought that was good. I also really liked the Sylvia runner here, that you pointed out, where like she like unloads and then Sylvia goes, "What was for dinner?" And then and then later like she unloads again and she's like, blah, 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 I'm gonna humiliate him. And then she goes, "What are you gonna serve?" Like she's all she thinks about is like what's to eat.
Yes. And there also was, I don't know if you noticed this detail, there was a detail happening.
I didn't.
Okay. Well, Fran and Sylvia are talking. There was this thing that I loved seeing on camera, and I realized why after. So while Fran is just, explaining what happened and this and that, she's preparing a bagel for herself. And she like cuts the bagel in half. And while they're talking, she's doing this thing that I grew up seeing women do, where she is taking the like bready part of the bagel like out. So basically you end up toasting a bagel that has a lot less bread in it. And yes, you can do this because maybe you just like the bagel that way. But I grew up because women were like, I want the bagel, but I don't want as many carbs. So it was like this like halfway thing that women dieting used to do. And I think what I liked seeing her do it, and it kind of also reminded me of that conversation we had last week where we were both kind of or whenever it was, about how like when Gracie and Maggie are trying to be skinny, it's like kind of like rude. But when Fran and Sylvia are like really struggling, like it feels fine. And I think it's because this was the 90s, obviously. And what I think a lot of our younger viewers don't realize is that, I mean, women were genuinely underweight, like on hit TV shows, like even way more prevalent than it is now. And, you could see women's like literal ribs and collarbones, and a lot of
not just TV, but like every model at the time, like the look for fashion and the look for, even not high fashion, like every model in the 90s, that was the look, right? I mean, and like there was a great Victoria's Secret documentary about that, about like all of these what were they had like the angels, all of like the Victoria's Secret angels of the 90s being like, we were like severely malnourished and it was like expected that we be.
But the thing about the thing that was also, I think, especially frustrating looking back is a lot of times women were like, you could literally see their bones sticking out. We're playing characters where part of their character was that they loved to eat and they were always gobbling food. Like I'll never forget like Deborah Messing in Will and Grace. The joke was that she was super food motivated, always had like a turkey leg or like a pie in her hand. Meanwhile, bones sticking out. Monica from Friends was
I was just going to say Courtney Cox on Friends.
She was a chef who loves food. And I once read a whole op-ed about this woman who like says like Gilmore Girls kind of mess with her head because these two women who are like, you know, clearly have these like petite bodies were always stuffing their faces with candy and takeout. And it was just sort of like you felt as a viewer of the time, like a young girl or woman, you felt like, oh, these women are eating all this stuff and they somehow have these bodies. Like I must be like somehow just so bad at this. I'm somehow like, something's just wrong with me that because it was, you know, in real life, those women who were, you know, devouring plates of food on camera were not eating behind the scenes. So it created this like very weird.
Weren't even devouring the food. I mean, we know for a fact that like they use spit buckets on set, like often.
There was a big cognitive dissonance where it's like someone on camera or on a show seemed to be so effortlessly tiny and it made you feel like such a failure that you were struggling or even working on, or even had to be on a diet if you wanted to look a certain way. And what I do like about seeing Fran's day to day or Sylvia is like, say what you will about like their obsession with trying to be thin, but like they're struggling. It's not like they're pretending that like it's just easy to have a certain type of body. And I think I was like, I love that about this show that like maybe, yes, of course you can have a larger conversation of it. It probably would have been better, you know, for society if they just never were trying to have a different body than what they had and were never trying to lose weight and were just not focused on weight. But if they were going to have women that are focused on this, then at least it's like they weren't pretending that it's easy, which I appreciated.
Yeah, but don't you feel like if they remade this show now, like the running gag of Sylvia being fat would not play, right? I don't even know that they would lean into that because it's just like it would be the opposite if anything. It would be like, yeah, Sylvia is a heavyset woman who loves food and that's okay. Like it's okay that she likes food.
Yes,
like, there's nothing wrong with it unless it becomes a health issue, you know?
Yes, and I think nowadays we just I think know better. We know about messaging more and we wouldn't do it. But given that like this show, like Fran doing that right next to a TV show where there's Deborah Messing with bones sticking out, stuffing pies down her face. I was like, I would rather see the Fran like more real version of this where
scooping a bagel. Yeah.
And then, that was very long aside, but Mr. Sheffield comes into the kitchen and he is super happy about how the night went, the previous night went, because he has no idea that all of those people were laughing behind Fran's back. In his mind, he's like, it was a huge success. And he's like, Fran charmed everyone, which was also super cute because like in his eyes, he's almost like, how could she not? Like, she's the most charming person in the world. Like, of course they loved her, you know? And he is so happy that he says that he has invited everybody at that party last night to a dinner party at the mansion where she can charm them even more. And then he also slips in that there's going to be some big potential investors there, you know, so this is going to be an important night. So now we cut to Fran literally crying on a park bench while eating a bucket of fried chicken because she is like, he has no idea I am a laughing stock and I don't know how to be different. Basically, I'm going to humiliate this man for the rest of our lives. And
I am who I am. Like,
and this she's so funny because it's a kindly old homeless man played by comedy legend Dick Martin. I had to Google it, but he was clearly a famous guy. We're just a little too young, but he was in Laugh-In. Or made famous by the show Laugh-In.
Suck it to me.
But so he comes and sits down next to her
That's a reference I barely get.
I know, right? It's like a whisper of a reference we know.
Well, it's funny because I feel like Cohen and I were talking about this. My friend Matt Cohen and I were talking about this the other day, where there are references that he and I, and probably you, have that we only have because like cartoons at the time were referencing these things because they were written by like 40, 50-year-old men who actually remembered these things.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
You know, like I only know I only know Nixon saying "sock it to me" on Laugh-In because of the parodies of it.
Yes.
You know? It's so weird. It's very strange that like we have all these points of references for stuff that definitely wasn't like I saw maybe one Abbott and Costello movie, but I know who they are and what they did. I know the bit, you know? It's so strange.
Hey, Abbott.
Yeah.
Oh,
yes.
Wait.
But that's not even that's from a Mel Brooks movie.
No, but yes, we know that, but it's also from Abbott and Costello.
Yes. Not Mel Brooks. Sorry. That's Princess Bride. Right?
Yes.
Princess Bride. Yeah.
I think so. Yes. But so Fran is
the
eating.
unhoused man is like super sweet too. He's like very, very kind and like not at all threatening. He just is sort of like, oh, you know, you seem sad and like
yes, he sits down next to her and he's like, you're Fran Phone. He's like, I read about you in the paper. And then he's like, read about you, slept on it, whatever. And she offers him some chicken and she goes, it was extra crispy, but I've been crying. Like, you've been crying into a bucket of chickens.
Which
and now
is
it's
gross.
soggy.
Yeah.
And he's eating it and he's like, well, you know, what's wrong? Why are you so sad? And she at first starts to be like, you know, have you ever just felt like you're such a loser and you're going to disappoint somebody? And then she kind of stops herself and she's like, you know, look at me. Like, here I am going on about my problems when I have so much to be grateful for. And she takes out a piece of paper and a pen and she's like, you know, here's my home address. If you're ever in the neighborhood and you're hungry, knock on the door. We always have chicken. And then she's like, unless a woman named Sylvia answers, then you're out of luck. But it was so sweet. And it just cuts to the heart of Fran, you know, like she's generous. She feels very blessed for what she has. And she kind of can't even help herself in that moment. Right.
The show makes a really interesting argument too, intentionally or not, that there's a level of empathy that lower society people are sort of naturally inclined to have that like the people in high society on this show almost never embody, you know? Like it's pretty consistent. Maybe I'm forgetting like small instances, but I feel like it's pretty consistent that any, you know, rich or high society character on this show that we've met or interacted with, even down to like our main characters, have this like slight lack of empathy. And, you know, Fran, Val, Sylvia, all of these other people who just are like normal people don't have that missing component to them. They see the world in a much, I would argue, a much clearer way, you know? I mean, because to not have empathy is like, from that standpoint, is really just like you're not really seeing the full world, right? You're so lost in your own bubble and up your own ass and like blinded by your money that like you don't open yourself up to anyone else, you know? And so I thought it was really, really sweet that Fran did that, and very genuinely too. It didn't feel like she was like humoring him. She like just very kind of earnestly is like, here's my address come anytime, which, you know, very nice. A little dangerous.
Yes, as they point out a little later. Then we cut to that night, and it's 3 hours into this dinner party, and nobody has showed. And I literally wrote, that is so rude. And Mr. Sheffield's even like, he's like, I've heard it fashionably late, but 3 hours, that's almost avant-garde. And he like just does not understand why like nobody would show up. And I was just like, these petty bees, like they're literally boycotting it because Fran's the host. That's awful.
Yeah. It's ridiculous.
And Fran sits him down, and because he's like, you know, what did I do? Did I do something to upset them? And she's like, you didn't do anything. Like, it's because of me. Like, you know, they were all laughing about me, and I'm the reason they're not here, and I'm the reason you're losing all these potential new backers. And Cece's sort of watching from the sidelines, and she's like eagerly waiting for, him to sort of realize that he's made a huge mistake in getting engaged to Fran and, all this stuff. But instead, he really, really shows his true colors. And he's like, oh my goodness. He's like, to hell with them. You're more important to me than any of them. You're more important to me than their money. And, you poor thing that this happened to you. And then I think Cece's eyes starts to twitch again. And then in a very sitcom, wrap it up very quickly way, the doorbell rings and they open the door and it is the man from the park. And at first, Fran's like, oh, I'll take care of it. I'll take care of him. I said he could have some food and maybe give him a little money. And then Mr. Sheffield's like, what are you talking about? Like, this is like so-and-so. He's the wealthiest man in New York, like that kind of thing. And it's like, he's, basically like a very wealthy potential investor. And this guy, and Fran's like, oh my God. And the guy, the man was like, Maxwell, like, you've got quite a woman here. I sat next to her on a park bench and she thought I had nothing. She literally gave me the address to your home. and Mr. Sheffield is like, okay, never do that again.
Yeah.
Which is also fair. And that's sort of, that's the resolution. He's basically like, Maxwell, you clearly have excellent taste. So whatever you need from me, like, I'm going to write you a check. And it all gets resolved that way. And it turns out that Fran's generosity,
the old rich guy pretending to be a bum.
I mean, or let's be fair, a lot of very rich guys, like a Bill Gates, like they could pass for a bum. Like, totally. But so it's also, the whole like Fran's act of generosity and kindness, which she never thought anyone would see, and she didn't do for any ulterior motives, is what ends up, saving the day. And
Fran staying true to herself ultimately saves the day.
Yeah. But I did right here where I was like, this is where my thought was, I kind of was hoping that maybe they would have this dinner party and Fran would come to this conclusion of like, to hell with them. I'm going to dare to be different and unique because that's who I am. And if they, and, maybe even saying something kind of sassy to one of these women. Like there's a part of me that wanted to sort of see that. But I also think this is very sweet too.
Well, 6 1/2 dozen the other, right? It's kind of the same ending because both endings would have been Fran staying true to herself. They just didn't do it in a I'll show you by being myself and winning you over. They did it in a she's intrinsically a good person and therefore good things happen to her. Which is a really nice message, honestly. But I think even maybe a little kinder message than like rubbing it in their faces in some way. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Very true.
And then we get a really funny button on the episode, which I don't know if we called out the runner of this. So earlier in the episode, Maxwell and Sylvia are in the same room. And Maxwell says, oh, good morning, Fran. And then he looks at Sylvia and he's like, good morning, Ma. And he's like, I don't know if I'm going to call you Ma. And she's like, oh, you're right. It's probably too soon. I should just come over more and spend more time here. And he goes, Mom, I love you. And he like throws his arms around her so she won't spend more time. So then the button is Sylvia and the kids are in the living room and the kids say, I think they call her Sylvia and she's like, no, call me grandma. She's like, or should I spend more time here? And then all of the kids go like, Granny and grandma. And then Gracie goes, Bubby, because Gracie has absorbed the most Jewishness, which is also a great through line. I love that. I thought the button was really clever.
Yes. In fact, we didn't even say this, but when Gracie first sees Fran's new ring, she says an extremely Jewish thing. She's like, yes, Taka, that's a gesund ring, which we'll get into. So should that lead us into segments?
Segments. And now, segments.
Segments.
Yeah, no, I think we should move on to segments.
We can move on to our segments.
And now, segments.
Segments. What's Sean for you?
I like to I like to shuffle papers while that's playing. So I feel like I'm like on a sitcom, on like a talk show,
set.
and like the band is playing us back in.
I think we've talked about that. How like every now and then I really do have something administrative to do while it's playing, and I feel very like, well, we're back now. On to a dog that thinks it's a cat.
Exactly. Our first guest tonight, you might know from.
We'd be great at that. Right, so, we'd be great at that. Someone should just
listen. If anyone is listening that wants to give us a talk show, we will co-host it. Hey, have they ever done that? I don't think they've ever done that.
Done what?
Had a late night talk show that had two hosts.
Yeah,
not like a host and a sidekick, but like two hosts sitting behind the same desk. It would be very funny.
But you know what though? Well, no, they did like Regis and Kelly and stuff. Regis and Kathy Lee.
I don't recognize any Regis partnerships.
But also the problem is we have radio faces, so.
Oh, speak for your. No, you're right. All right, so favorite lines and moments. Let's see. She's turning into a shiksa right before my eyes. Love it. Oh, Fran saying the kids are Jewish now because the mother is Jewish, meaning her, which I thought was such a great bit of like backwards logic. She's like, well, I'm Jewish and now I'm these kids' stepmother, so that makes the kids Jewish.
Yeah. I liked when they were at Uncle Sammy's jewelry store. They're looking at this ring and Mr. Chevy goes, is that a crack? And then Uncle Sammy goes, if you have to ask, how big could it be? And then in that same scene, Mr. Sheffield holds up this piece of jewelry and he goes, this is the gaudiest thing I've ever seen. And Fran goes, shh, if you like it, 86 it and I'll work him down. Because in her mind, the only reason you would outwardly critique something in a store like this is because you actually love it and are angling to get it cheaper.
Yes.
Oh, there was this line that we didn't mention where when nobody shows up to the dinner party, Niles, he's holding this tray and he goes, oh, well, what am I going to do? I have shrimp for 45 people. And then Fran's like, it's all right. I'll invite Ma over for brunch tomorrow. And he goes, great. Now I have to go and get more.
So another thing we kind of glazed over a little bit was, at first, Cece's on the couch and Gracie's like counseling her, right? Gracie's like, yeah, you got to move on with your life, da-da-da. But then when we come back to the scene, Cece's in the same spot, but Gracie has left and Niles is sitting next to her. Mm-hmm. And she's like, oh, and she's like weeping and he's, and he's like letting her go. But then she goes, and the worst part is Maxwell told me they were going to fire Niles. And then she like kind of smirks and she's like, I knew you were sitting behind me the whole time, which I really liked.
Yes, absolutely.
I think maybe that's it for me.
Yeah, I mentioned a lot of my others.
Yeah.
Earlier.
So
Yiddish. We got shiksa. We got shiksa, taka, which means indeed. So like now, like taka, this is a gesunter ring, meaning like indeed that, and gesund means healthy. So like when Gracie says that, like a old Jewish woman, she's like, indeed, that is a healthy ring.
Yeah.
So cute. Okay. And then are you ready for this nanny trivia?
Yeah, because I might have some nanny trivia for you too, but I want to see what you got.
Okay, so I was just curious. I was like, how much would that ring from Cartier be, right? Because that was a huge ring.
Okay, in the 90s or with inflation?
I just checked out what a Cartier expensive ring is now, and I think that will just give. That's all we need, okay? So because they don't say a price then, so it doesn't really matter. But I went on the website. Like one of the most expensive rings at Cartier, which I believe are, is the kind that Fran would have had, $155,000. $155,000. So I would say that the average was in the like $35K range.
Yeah.
But if you're gonna go big at Cartier, you are spending like $155,000, and whatever that would have been in 90s money, it would have been like the equivalent. So wow. My God, just to give us
the ring I bought for Elizabeth's a real piece of shit in comparison. I didn't have $150,000 to spend.
Right. Can you imagine wearing something like that on your body?
it feels dangerous, and I feel like I would be anxious at all times. So,
and
no.
also, dude, I lose, if I don't even like to spend $40 on sunglasses because I'm going to leave them somewhere. Like, oh my God.
I got insurance for the engagement ring.
Yeah, I mean, people, of course,
I was
get
nervous,
insurance.
Which you should. Yeah. Okay, so I have a little trivia. First of all, correction corner. Welcome to Correction Corner. The high society woman in this episode was not Diane Wilk.
Dorothy Lyman. Oh my God, Dorothy Lyman. No, yes. You're right. I don't know why I said Diana Wilk. I meant Dorothy Lyman.
Because you hate Dorothy Lyman. That's clearly.
No, I love her.
I also wanted to point out, not only is Mort Drescher in this episode playing Uncle Stanley, but did you know that one of the two maids in the kitchen was Adeline Drescher?
Who is that? Her sister?
I don't know. So I tried to find out what the relationship is, and like the internet's real, like they just keep going like she's an actor in things, and she was in 7 shows that Fran Drescher did. So it's like clearly she's got to be right. This is not like a accidental Drescher that they found. So I'm not sure if she's a sister or a cousin or what. I don't know, or an aunt maybe. I don't know. But Adeline Drescher played maid number 1. So I'm assuming that's got to be another family cameo. Maybe someone from the show can weigh in.
Yeah, because her real life sister is Nadine, so I don't think it's the same person. So
interesting.
Oh right, no! It says look here. It says Adeline Drescher, niece of Mort Drescher and Sylvia Drescher. So it's a cousin.
How did you find that? I suck at Google.
I know. I just Googled it. That was right there.
All right. Stole my segment thunder. No, so I thought that was interesting. And then we have what? Who's the Fran? Who's the Cece?
Who's the Fran of the Cece? I really related to the characters in this episode who were having to adjust to calling Sylvia Ma or Grandma, because I grew up with step families, and that I had forgotten about that. I'd kind of forgotten that is a part of it, where people are like, well, what do you want to be called now? And people are, it's kind of awkward because no one really quite knows how to handle it, So I was.
It's funny that you said that, because that was literally mine. Because similarly, not just when you're a child in a step family situation, but when you start to get in-laws, as I am now getting, that question also comes up of like, well, what do I call you? Mm-hmm. And like my mom, like the moment we got engaged was like, please call me mom. And Elizabeth, God bless her soul, embraced it immediately. But yeah, that's a thing, right? Is like, what do I start calling a lady mom? Like it's weird a little bit, right?
Yeah.
I also definitely felt like, oh yeah, I can relate to this for sure.
Funny that we often don't, I feel like, hone in on the same more like minute part of these episodes. That is interesting. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
but and then sometimes, just to be a jerk, I'll call Elizabeth's dad Daddy. I go, thank you, Daddy, and he goes, stop it. So yeah, that is maybe the first time in Oh Mr. Sheffield podcast history that you and I have had like kind of the same character for the same reason.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So now we drink. No. All right.
Oh, we were supposed to wait?
Yeah. Well, this has become a very long record, but
yes. Good episode. Listen, when the episodes are great, sometimes we go long, and when they're really, really bad, sometimes we go long.
Yeah, there's no rhyme or reason. There's no rules. Hey, there's no rules in this house.
Hell no. You want to do wrap up?
Yeah, we're done. Yeah, do wrap up. So, Oh Mr. Chef Pod on Instagram. That's where we are a lot. We almost have 500 followers now, which is so awesome. Please rate and review us on Apple. We're still a little baby podcast, even though we've been doing this for a long time. And we have such a great community. We love this community. They fuel us. But yeah, if you haven't yet, do rate and review, and let's spread the good news.
Yep. And if you want to, you don't have to, but if you want to, it would make us very happy if you send us an email at ohmrsheffieldpodcast@gmail.com. But you don't have to. Tori and I will be okay not feeling any love in the email. I'm doing Jewish guilt. I feel like it's on theme for the show. Yeah. But yeah, no, truly enjoy this community immensely. I spent like 20 minutes this morning responding to almost every single Instagram comment that we got over the last like 5 or 6 posts. So that's always fun when I can play catch up and respond to people. And Twitter. Hey, listen, our Twitter community is growing. It's also Oh Mr. Chef Pod on Twitter. We're finally starting to get some traction in the world's worst place. So yay, I guess. And on that note, ladies and gentlemen, goodbye.
Goodbye. The Flushing girl from Flushing, the nanny named Fran.
Oh, Mr. Sheffield.
Miss Fine.